right, we're going to get going shortly because we got a lot to talk about. Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony Mercurio. I'm a senior advisor at Win the Era. Really thrilled to have so many folks joining tonight. I think we had over 1,000 people RSVP, so pretty pumped about that. This is Win the Era's first big event of the year, and we're excited to get started. I am going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to our amazing moderator and someone a lot of folks are going to recognize and celebrate, who's now doing amazing work in the state of Michigan, but formerly of Pete for America. I'll turn it over to you, Ro.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me do this. It's always great to get the band back together. I'm Ro. I was on the rapid response team for Pete, and now I'm in the beautiful state of Michigan working to get secure another term for Big Gretch, Governor Whitmer. So with that, we'll go ahead and get this panel started because we have three amazing panelists today. We have my favorite chair, the best chair of all time, Lavora Barnes, who's the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. We also have Ben Wickler, who's the chair of Wisconsin Democratic Party, and then y'all know Shmuel, who is currently chairing for the Indiana Democratic Party. We'll just get started by having everyone introduce themselves and kind of walk through what's going down in your amazing states. So we'll start with Lavora.
Thank you so much, Ro. So good to see you from down the road. Ben, Mike, great to be here with you. By the way, I'm going to start calling you Shmuel because that's what apparently we call you. I'm Lavora Barnes. I'm the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. I'm a very busy chair, as are Shmuel and Ben, because so much is going on. I have to tell you, here in Michigan, if there's anything you've read about or heard about happening in the right-wing nut job political environment, it's happening here in Michigan. I could make a list for you, but it would take the entire hour. But let me tell you this, we have an uphill battle because we've got some big things to get done here in Michigan this cycle. We've got to protect our women from Michigan, our Governor Whitmer, Attorney General Nessel, and Secretary of State Benson. We've got to flip the State House and State Senate, and we're fighting down ballot races. We're going to win school board races. We're going to win clerk races, because if we don't fight all the way from the bottom of the ticket up to the top, the Republicans take over and democracy ends. And we can't have democracy end, not here in Michigan, not in Indiana, not in Wisconsin, not in the United States of America. So the work that we're doing here will hopefully lead to victories here and then victories in 2024. We build, we build, we build. So I'd love to talk more about Michigan, but that's a quick nutshell of the madness that's happening in Michigan.
Awesome. Thanks, Lavora. Ben, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ro. It's great to be with Win the Era, with everyone, and with Shmuel and Lavora. Wisconsin is just a scorched earth battleground in the fight for democracy right now, which keeps making national news for all the wrong reasons. We have local far-right prosecutors threatening to jail our bipartisan elections commissioners. We have a right-wing kind of star chamber investigation that's tried to jail mayors of the largest cities in Wisconsin for fairly administering the election in 2020. And now we have three Republicans running for governor, all of whom have vowed to dismantle our bipartisan elections commission and put partisan Republican elected officials in charge as they take power. One of them has also introduced legislation to retroactively rip away Joe Biden's electors and hand them to Trump, and to allow the overturning of statewide elections if the margin of victory is less than the number of absentee ballots, which has been true of the last 5 presidential elections. So this guy, Tony Evers, is the key to stopping them from becoming governor, but it really is up and down the ballot. We have local elections on April 5th with fraudulent electors and Stop the Steal organizers running for local office where they could affect election administration. That's April 5th coming up right away. We have a fight to prevent Republican supermajorities in the state legislature, an attorney general battle up and down the ticket, and of course, Ron Johnson, who we have to defeat. So it is nonstop action in Wisconsin. 4 of the last 6 presidential races here came down to less than 1 percentage point. So little things matter an enormous amount in our state. And I'm so grateful for everyone being involved in the fight for democracy at this moment, because we really need it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. All right, Shmuel, take us home.
Oof. All right. Well, thank you, Ro. Very good to see you again. And it's great to be joined with Lavora and Ben, 2 chairs that I sought out as soon as I was considering this role and assumed it 11 months ago because they're Midwesterners, northern states, and also just renowned around the party for year-round organizing and some of the principles and things that they've deployed as chairs. And so it's great to be joined with them. I see some names in the chat that I haven't seen their names or faces in years, and I miss you and hope to see you soon. But greetings from Indianapolis. So I just was on US 31 driving down here in the ice and snow. Reminded me of when I drove down with Pete and Chasten. I think we had to fly to DC to start the exploratory committee about 3 years ago. Similar conditions. So I had to get here on time for this call. But Indiana is really, I think, at a crossroads. You know, our state motto is the crossroads of America. And I really took this job because I think that our state and our democracy here in the Hoosier State is at a crossroads. We're in supermajority territory for both chambers. Republicans have control of both. We don't have a statewide elected Democrat here in Indiana, which is a far cry from the Indiana that I grew up in, that Pete grew up in. For the balance of our lives, it's really been half and half as it relates to Democratic governors and senators and control of the state house where they pass laws. And so this is what happens when one party gets control and holds on to it for so long. And Lavora and Ben just articulated what happens is you get the extreme elements of that party. And we see it here in Indiana, attacking trans kids, saying what can be taught and cannot be taught in schools. I have to put out statements saying that Nazism is bad in 2022. It is just unbelievable. And so putting in place long-term programs that inform people, educate people, get people to the polls to swing back the pendulum of power for Democrats in Indiana is essential. And that is why I took on this role, so we could build back power for our side and have a more balanced and a more fair Indiana for the future.
Awesome. Well, that was very well said. And we're going to go ahead and get into some of the questions that we have put together. But if anyone has some other ones, please feel free to submit them to the chat, and we will get to as many as possible. So let's try to move as quickly as we can. So Ben, I'm going to have you start this first one off, but this one is for all three of you. In the aftermath of the big lie on January 6th, which all of you kind of touched on this already, the GOP's anti-democratic rhetoric has only intensified. We know that states are the laboratories of democracy. So how can we ensure we're doing everything we can at the state level to protect and safeguard our democracy?
It's such a critical question. And I think, you know, the three state parties represented here and some other ones have a key piece of the answer to this, which is to organize not just in the final few months of an election, but on a year-round basis, to do voter protection on a year-round basis, meaning you build relationships with local election administrators, you make sure that there are folks in court at every step of the battle in these fights, and to focus not just on the marquee races. We absolutely have to win the governorships in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania to hold up the blue wall, but also to get down to the very local level, to the people who actually run the nuts and bolts of election administration. You can see on the Republican side an effort driven by Steve Bannon and others to get folks into those roles, to recruit poll workers, to have people in each precinct, to get people on the city councils that set the budgets for whether there will be early vote locations. We need to organize at that level even more effectively than the other side. And the good news is that work is happening right now. I can see it happening in Wisconsin. Lavora will share what's happening in Michigan, but it requires the kind of sustained effort, even in the offices that never make the newspaper, in places where the newspaper was basically, you know, bought up and folded by a hedge fund, when no one's watching. That's where you have to do this work to prevent Republicans from dismantling our democracy. And state parties play a critical role in that kind of local infrastructure that makes all the difference.
Awesome. Thank you. Lavora, I'm going to kick it to you next, because it seems like every other day there's a Stop the Steal rally happening.
There is.
Grounds.
There is indeed always a Stop the Steal rally, or something even more ridiculous than that. And I have to say, Ben hit the nail on the head. The organizing that we started this year-round program back in 2017, and we haven't stopped, really does make a difference in electing these local folks. Like we're looking at now making a push to elect local clerks because it's the clerk who administers the election. It's the clerk who will make sure that the rules that are in place are followed. We have so many volunteers on our voter protection team. We have a full-time voter protection team here in Michigan. It is unusual for a state party to do that, but we did that because of all of the attacks on the rights of voters that have happened here in Michigan. We felt the need to always be watching and to always be ready to go to court if we have to, but to do whatever we need to do to protect the access to the ballot here in Michigan. And I have to say that we have to find ways to help to hold Republicans accountable, not just for what they do, not just for the crazies, but for not pushing back on their Republican colleagues when they are crazy. We can't just sit back and let the Republicans get away with not condemning some of the behavior. If you can't bring it to yourself to condemn an insurrection, if you can't bring it to yourself to condemn someone who wants to kidnap and murder a governor, if you can't bring it to yourself to make those sort of condemnations, you have no right to be elected, and we're going to hold you accountable and we're going to come after you. And the other thing we want to do is talk to the folks who are funding these elections. Why are you writing checks to support corruption? Why are you writing checks to support insurrection? Why are you writing checks to support anti-democratic, small d, democratic candidates? Stop it, right? And we're going to call you out when you do it. And so we spend a lot of time, and thank you to all of you for being here, because the other thing you can do, state parties are where it is, folks. I love that you support your candidates, you support your governors. Please write a check to Gresham Whitmer if you haven't already, please do that. But while you're writing, write a check to the state party, because the work that we do that supports the ballot, bottom to top. And it's so important in protecting democracy and making sure that we can protect ourselves and our elected officials and our electors, our voters, from the Republicans who really are making every effort they can to turn back the clock on voting rights and other rights here in Michigan and all over the country.
Thanks, Lavora. Mike, what about you? What's going on in Indiana?
Yeah, well, I'd piggyback on what Lavora said, and Jamie Harrison says this a lot, that state parties are like unicorns. We can collect money from lots of sources and we can deploy it through lots of sources. That coordinating activity that we have is really special and allows us to put in place programs for the long term to strengthen the party across the board and up and down the ballot. Here in Indiana, all those things that Ben and Lavora mentioned, organizing, voter protection, secretaries of state races across the country are critical. Clerks races are critical. Control of inspectors and how elections are conducted is really important. So there's a transparent and open process. Here in Indiana, there's a bill in the House, 1116, that would make somebody swear under penalty of perjury that they cannot vote on election day or vote by mail early. Think of that. So for 28 days, somebody has to say, oh, I need an absentee ballot because it's going to be impossible for me to vote in this 28-day period, when it just should be available for that person to vote by mail or vote early if they want. This is the kind of stuff that's happening systematically across the country and has to be stopped. One thing that Ben mentioned, and one thing that I'm working on building here in Indiana, and Ro, you can appreciate this as a rapid response professional, is building a war room. The DNC has a war room. I would argue that every state party needs to have a war room as well at this point. Somebody's waking up every day, Fox News, conservative radio, whatever you find on the internet, that has to be pushed back on. Misinformation, disinformation, fake news, conspiracy theories. There's no small town newspaper anymore in the USA, as Ben said. I truly believe that parties are in a unique position to educate and inform people and push back against that misinformation every single day. Because it can't just be a one-off. It can't just be an event. It can't just be one field touch. It has to be consistently informing people with facts about what's going on in their state and in this country.
Thanks. Ben, this one's for you. Post 2016, Wisconsin Democrats have made an unprecedented commitment to party building under your leadership. This has resulted in winning some very important state and local elections. So how can that model be sustained and replicated across the country?
Thank you. And I'm so glad Wisconsin is in the club right there with Lavora and Michigan. After the 2016 loss, which was just heartbreaking and very, very narrow, my predecessor chair decided to launch a year-round organizing initiative. Now, doing that meant taking a lot of heat because the conventional wisdom for far too long has been that you should save your money until right at the end so you can do a big blitz in the final push. And I remember talking to elected officials who were complaining to me that my predecessor chair was wasting money on organizers far from election day. The reality is, when you hire early, you can actually build relationships. It's like planting a tree. You want to go back in town and plant that tree as early as possible so that it's big by election day. So our state party's organizing model is that we hire organizers whose job is to meet with and build relationships with local leaders and train them to launch volunteer teams, neighborhood teams like you saw with the Obama campaigns in 2008 and 2012, where the volunteer team leaders in a neighborhood then recruit volunteers in their community to knock on doors and make phone calls and talk to the voters. They learn every inch of their turf. My mom is in the local neighborhood team here. She was recently phone banking to call people in apartment buildings where a lot of people move in and out, so that in every apartment building there would be someone who could knock on the doors of their own neighbors. That's only possible when you have something that is there for years, not just days, not just a couple months at the end of the election. And what we did in Wisconsin, and I know happened in Michigan, is we built a year-round statewide organizing program that was adopted by the presidential campaign, by President Biden's campaign in 2020. They didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They could just adopt our infrastructure for the final push. And then we were right back at it after the election. We won a statewide election in 2021 in Wisconsin for the head of public schools, where Betsy DeVos's super PAC was running hundreds of thousands of dollars of ads using all the dog whistles they were using in Virginia. But here we won by 16 percentage points in a landslide victory with hugely increased voter turnout on both sides relative to 2017, which was a high turnout year. Year-round organizing makes a difference. And to do it, you need to have a group of extraordinary people working at the party. And you need commitment from donors, from people who will make that financially possible, so that you don't, go bankrupt and go into debt the day after the election and lay off the entire staff, which is historically what happened in Wisconsin in the Walker era and in other times and other places as well. Having that year-round commitment to infrastructure, not just candidate campaigns, is so critical, and it means you build a floor that the candidates stand on, so that they don't have to dig the foundations to be able to get their campaign off the ground.
Thanks, Ben. Lavora, I had a similar question for you, but since I got my political start in Georgia, and Georgia very much does not have not even an organizational one, but they didn't back in 2014. They've certainly picked it up since, as we saw with the huge wins of Senator John Ossoff and Ralph Warnock. But now, are you concerned about, with having these year-round organizational operations, are you concerned with voter kind of fatigue, and how do you combat that, especially when Republicans are in Michigan in any way, are making it kind of a point of their party to sow so much distrust and discord in the democratic process?
It's a really great question, Ro. I'm glad you asked it, because what we need to tell you is that the conversations our organizers are having and their volunteers are having are not all vote for conversations. Part of what this grassroots work does is allows us to have conversations with voters where we ask them what issues matter to them. And then we have a conversation about why supporting Democrats is how you get to that issue that's important to them. And we can have those conversations multiple times with them throughout the year before we go back and ask for that vote. The mistake we've been making for cycle is just showing up in September and October and asking for the vote without building the relationship, without having the conversation, without having the back and forth. And because our folks are getting to know their folks so well, they can help us block the disinformation. They're standing on that doorstep being asked the question, I heard this from the Republicans, is that true? And they're getting an answer from someone they've seen before, someone they've heard from before, and someone they trust. So this is a big part of combating that disinformation, is having these folks active on the ground in their local communities. And I have to say, all of us have local clubs, in addition to our organizers, who are learning how to do this work as well, so that we're spreading these tentacles, so that for me in Michigan, our clubs are no longer, book clubs and dinner clubs, but they're actually organizing organizations. They're setting themselves up so that they can support candidates, they can support candidate work, and they can have good conversations with voters. And this is a change from the way we used to do things here in Michigan. But it's so important. Neighbor-to-neighbor conversations about the truth really go much further than them hearing from a candidate who shows up asking for a vote. That vote question comes later, but the first conversations are all about issues and getting to know folks and getting to understand the issues that matter to them.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to jump into a question for everybody. From the massive vaccine rollout, record job growth, historic infrastructure investment, President Biden and Democrats in Congress have had an impressive list of accomplishments. How do we make sure voters know about them and give Democrats credit for these successes? And Shmuel, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you to start.
Thanks, Ro. Yeah, last year was an off year in Indiana, so we didn't have any elections. Nobody was on the ballot. It's the 1 year out of 4 where we don't have any election activity. It's also the year that we have our reorg, and so that's when we elect new party leaders at the county level and then, of course, at the state level. But I didn't want to treat that year as just a year in the office, reorganizing things, hiring people, figuring all of that out. I wanted the party to be more nimble and more outward facing. And so, the American Rescue Plan was passed, I believe, in March, in the spring of last year, followed up by the bipartisan infrastructure deal. So what we did is once ARP passed, we hit the road and we went literally on tour around Indiana to talk to people face to face. And all total last year, we visited 55 counties out of 92 that we have. So not quite as many as Iowa, but we have 92 counties. And this year, we're right now in the middle of another tour, the Jobs Tour, to talk about the Jobs Act. But what these tour stops have done is they served a few different purposes, Ro. It's not just about getting news clips and earned media, which is great, but we get local elected officials out to participate and to speak to the press, speak to the party faithful. You also have to remember 2020 was a presidential year where we were going through a global pandemic. And so a lot of these little county parties, kind of up against the ropes, they haven't really been doing a lot. They've been doing a lot of stuff at home. It was an opportunity for us to find a park pavilion, find a VFW hall, find a public place to bring folks together and physically have an event and kind of get the rust out, get the cobwebs out, get everybody together again. And so it served multiple purposes, not just political. And so that's something that I think we're going to probably just continue to do in perpetuity if the staff can find, enough gas and cars and things like that. Just because it shows that the state party is nimble and that we are in front of folks. We're face to face with you, talking about the issues and problems that everybody's facing. And so, to me, that's politics at its best, and that's how we've gone all around the state to sell the Build Back Better agenda.
Thanks, Shmuel. Ben, how's it been going in Wisconsin with this?
It's just totally critical. When people know what Democrats have actually done, it makes a gigantic difference. And typically, a lot of frustration comes from the fact that people are getting their news from sources that don't want to highlight Democratic success and victories. So, as my friend in Indiana has been doing, we've been doing these earned media events where we have people talk about investments happening in their own community, the impact that it made on them personally. We did that with parents all over the state after the child tax credit started coming through. And honestly, people cried in Zoom meetings talking about what it was like to say yes to their kids who wanted to learn a musical instrument. They could afford that instrument and those lessons for the first time in their lives. Bringing it home, connecting it to real life makes a giant difference. And we have a communications team with a full-time staff member who's just focused on making sure that we get out word about what the president has been able to achieve. We have a digital team that now has a network of influencers in their own kind of local social media ecosystems where we push out a regular stream of information and content that helps to echo through the local networks of information that make a difference. I often say the best message is the one that comes from the right messenger. And when you're talking about cutting through the right-wing noise machine in rural Wisconsin, for example, or making sure that folks who might be skeptical of the Democratic Party in the Hmong community in Wisconsin, which Republicans have done a lot to try to send propaganda to. It's really critical to have folks who speak the language, who understand the local context, who can speak in a genuine way to the impact of Democratic policies. And that's what we've invested in.
Awesome. What about Michigan, Lavora?
That's a great answer, both from Ben and from Shmuel. You guys are awesome. And ditto in many ways, right? A lot of the same things happening. But one of the things that I want to talk about is the importance of having good news to share The importance of having a White House that is delivering. I think that's the term we've all been using, right? Democrats deliver, the White House is delivering, and how much that helps our volunteers also. It gives them something good to talk about, and how much they love having those conversations on the phone where they're talking about good news and delivering. And also, this has been very helpful to us in helping our governor deliver as well. You know, we've got a Republican legislature who has blocked her at every turn. She ran on a promise to fix the damn roads, and then the Republicans in the legislature stopped her every time she tried to fix the damn roads. But guess who helps her actually fix the damn roads? It's a Democrat we put in the White House. So being able to connect those things for our voters as well, the importance of winning at the state level, at the national level, and then having Democrats working together to make a difference in people's lives is a big deal. And I've been enjoyed watching us be able to talk about it. And I have to say, Ro, you're doing a terrific job of being a rapid response director and talking about it all that you can.
Awesome, thank you. I will always take free praise. So I'm going to put, we've got about 15 minutes left here, so I'm going to put two questions together. Kaz asked, long-term progress means the party and grassroots. How can the grassroots build the party's trust at the state and county level? And then also, what are ways that Democrats can make sure we're expanding the circle of who we're talking to and who we're reaching, and actually build a party that reflects the diversity of our country? So Shmuel, I'll give it to you to give a quick answer on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ro. That's a great question. I think the grassroots stuff's really, really important. I think it relates to some of the year-round organizing work that Ben and Labora have already put in place, where really a lot of the activity, really a lot of the power and a lot of the influence in the community building happens at the county level, happens at the local level with the Democratic Party. And I think that that's where we are at our best. You know, I think a lot of people, when I took this role, are like, oh, the chairman, you know, powerful, you have your little gavel. I think politics is at its best when, again, it's people focused. I think that's a very Pete Buttigieg principle as well. And that you empower people, you help people, you give them resources, you train them, you coach them, you help them put together a plan with some best practices and some assistance, but they really go and they make it their own voice. They make it their own work. And so I think that is really critical as it relates to grassroots party building. Also, we just had our filing deadline, but you could file for precinct committee in Indiana. And that's something that we promoted and that I pushed as often as I could to run for office in your neighborhood as a party person. To make a difference. That's probably the first step that somebody can take when they put their name on the ballot. As it relates to diversifying the party, this is also really critical. I mean, our state central committee isn't particularly large. I've heard from other state parties that have enormous state central committees, but we have constituency caucuses. We have different councils, different groups that advocate for different Hoosiers all around Indiana. So working with them, making sure that they not only have a place at the table, but they have a vote at the table to see what the party is doing, to see what we're building, to provide input, to help me build a stronger party is really critical. And perhaps one of the, I would say also in Michigan and Wisconsin, another way to diversify the party is reaching out to rural Hoosiers and rural Americans. And I think for far too long, we think of rural voters as just white voters, but that's not true. It's rural voters are also diverse voters. And that's something that Indiana, farming state, lots of counties, you can drive for a long time between towns, reaching those folks because they are either kind of floating out there or they've gone with Trump over the last few cycles. We have to talk to those people, show them a place in the Democratic Party. We bring a good chunk of those folks back into the fold and we can really be unbeatable in the cycles ahead. So that's what I'm seeing.
Good. Very uplifting. I hope. Laura, I'm going to kick this one to you. We're getting a lot of questions about how you can handle tough issues like choice in the upcoming elections. And as your organizers are on the ground, I'll tell the group that Michigan has one of the most restrictive abortion ban on the books that would immediately revert back to if Roe v. Wade were to get struck down. It is basically a near total abortion ban. So how are you explaining that to voters on the ground, especially when you're like Mike said, reaching out to more rural communities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, because I think a lot of folks in Michigan don't know that law still sits on the books. So we're educating folks about the fact that if Roe v. Wade falls, this what becomes the law here in Michigan. And if we don't do something about it, that's why our governor has already asked the legislature to repeal that thing. We've got to get that law off the books just in case. And we've got to continue to fight at every level, the top to bottom. Again, I say it every time, bottom to top and top to bottom, to make sure we're electing folks who understand the importance of protecting all of our rights, our right to choose, our right to vote, our right to read what we want to read, all of our rights. And I just want to, as Shmuel was talking about coalitions and stuff, I think one of the exciting things that we've been able to do here in Michigan, to layer on top of the grassroots organizing that we do in all 83 counties, is a coalitions team, right? So now we're talking about bringing folks on who are responsible for African American outreach, for Latino outreach, for Arab American outreach here in Michigan. And this is a layer that we haven't done. We have always had the caucuses of our party, but this is the first time that we'll have staffers on board with a specific job of making sure we're doing outreach into those communities to bring in new voices and to bring new folks to the table and to make them feel like they're part of this party. And also, we have a rural caucus, which is relatively new to us here in Michigan. They're very active, very serious about helping organize rural communities. And our county chairs who are representing rural areas spend a lot of time sharing best practices and talking about the work that they do and how to do outreach. Because a lot of times when they hear me talk about going door to door, they say, Laura, I can't go door to door. Next door is 2.5 miles away. Give me something else. Give me some tools. So we're working hard to make sure we're giving folks all the tools they need to do that outreach, whether they're in an urban or a rural part of Michigan, because we have everything here. And it's a beautiful state to live in, but a hard state to organize if you're truly about organizing the entire state.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got off topic a little bit.
No, you're right. I mean, I've basically been going on a world food tour since I've been here.
Yes, exactly.
So that's been great. Ben, this one's for you from Nicole. She says we saw in the Virginia elections last year that inflation and school policies with the pandemic were a challenge. So how are you combating kind of similar sentiments in Wisconsin?
Sure. So on education, we are lucky to have an education governor. He was a science teacher. He was a school principal, superintendent, then the head of public schools for the state. And under his leadership, Wisconsin schools have gone from being ranked number 17th in the country to being ranked number 8. So we have a clear record on this. The key thing that we've found, and we both had the state superintendent race last year. We had attempts to recall school board members last fall that the Republican candidate, frontrunner for governor, got involved in, was knocking on doors in, that completely fell flat. The key is the message that we shouldn't turn kids into political pawns, and that these attacks on schools are actually being driven by people who want to dismantle public education in general. There's this really striking thing where Republicans in Wisconsin and across the country, they level these attacks in particular school districts about their curriculum. Their solution is to defund public education, dismantle public schools, and send public dollars to private schools. And in rural areas, there aren't a lot of public schools. So this is actually, private schools. It's not like you can switch to a private school in a lot of rural Wisconsin. So their message, when you explain what Republicans are trying to do, and there's lots of data to back this up, it actually can backfire on them. So we're winning the education fight in Wisconsin by explaining Republicans' intentions and by making the case for why it makes sense to invest in great public education. The inflation fight is fundamentally about whether you're trying to bring down the cost of living for regular folks or supporting driving it up. And we have a record surplus in Wisconsin at the same time as record low unemployment. So our governor's proposing, sending money back to folks to make sure that they have the money to cover these rising costs. Republicans are blocking it and insisting the money should just stay in the state capitol until they have a Republican who can decide how to spend it. That's an unpopular position for them as well. And it's sort of like the Build Back Better plan, which I hope has broken into chunks and passed into law, because it's fundamentally about reducing the costs that people face in their lives. I think so much of politics is about demonstrating to people that you get it, you understand what's going on in their lives, and that you're on their side, and showing how the other side in the fight is not on their side. And I think we have a very strong case to make on both education and inflation on that front.
Yeah, I'll back you up on the education front. It's my job working for Michigan Democratic Party to get basically reporters to ask Republicans what their actual plans are. And, all of them have been like, let's defund, let's do school vouchers for public schools. And, I had one of the reporters ask one of the main candidates, okay, well, like, what happens to these public school districts then? And he said it would magically work itself out. So that's what we're dealing with. And since we are almost out of time, I'm going to move it to our last question. And this is for all of you. What was the last experience or interaction that left you feeling hopeful about the rest of the cycle? And Lavora, I'll kick it to you first.
Oh, way to talk about hope, bro. I'm going to start by saying that there is always hope. I happen to have in my life a 9-month-old grandbaby who gives me hope every time I look into his eyes. But I had a conversation yesterday with a potential candidate for local office, who was so devoted to the notion of fairness and democracy, and such a patriot and such a believer in the work that she wants to do for the people of her community, that she literally brought tears to my eyes. And I said, well, there's your stump. You've clearly figured that out, my dear. She is willing to come out of a self-imposed retirement to do this because she sees what's happening all around her and believes that she can contribute. And that's what I want people to believe, that there is something that they contribute, no matter whether they are running for office, whether they're volunteering with a phone bank or a text message or a tweet. Whatever you're doing, I want you to believe that it has the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people. And it does. It still does. It's still true. No matter what the Republicans are trying to do to us, it is still true that we can make a difference. We just can't give up. We can't sit down and let it happen to us. We have to step up and speak up. And she reminded me yesterday that stepping up and speaking up is still something people do, even if they haven't been asked, just because they see it needs to get done. So hope right there in Michigan. Thanks, Ro.
Shmuel, what about you?
It's a great question. I think I have 3 answers, and they're all very different. One is, I don't know if folks saw Amy Schneider's run in Jeopardy, but I was just like, I loved it. And so I was tuning in every night, such a dork, watching Jeopardy. But she was just her authentic self. And it was just so cool to watch her perform and just be so smart and humble and American original. She's really cool. So if folks haven't seen her, I'd Google her and check that out. Another one that's a little weird is this week I was able to see my first boss in politics, who's not Pete Buttigieg, Joe Donnelly, be sworn in as ambassador to the Vatican, nominated by Joe Biden, which is a really cool experience. Very small, but having somebody of his caliber, his experience to go over to Rome and work with the Catholic Church on issues like poverty, human rights, the climate crisis, human trafficking, really gave me a lot of hope, just because I know who Joe is as a person. And then lastly, this is super weird because it's going to happen tomorrow and it hasn't started yet, but I think it's going to be hopeful, as I'm meeting with all the State House interns. And so young people involved in politics, working at the State House every day, I think that is going to be a great meeting, a great lunch tomorrow. So those are my 3.
Awesome. Ben, what about you?
I'll do 3 quick ones too. One is, on Tuesday night, we had the polls closed in the primary for local offices across Wisconsin. And I went to the event where Cavalier Johnson, who is our acting mayor right now, because Mayor Tom Barrett of Milwaukee just became an ambassador. Cavalier Johnson came in first in the primary. He's heading to the general election in April. He'll be the first Black elected mayor in the history of Milwaukee, which is Wisconsin's most diverse city. And he is an extraordinary leader and part of a rising generation of leaders in Milwaukee that includes the county executive, the head of the county board, the head of the city council, that's really, I think, poised to transform the biggest city in our state. That's really exciting. I met with the Racine County Democratic Party recently, and they laid out for me that they've recruited candidates who are fighting for majorities on the county board, which would be the first progressive majority there in 42 years, majority in the city council, and majority on the school board. And this huge local diverse candidate recruitment operation in one of the swingiest parts of Wisconsin, in a moment when supposedly the right has all the energy in running for these local offices, it just filled me with energy and excitement. And the last piece was a meeting yesterday with my organizing director, where she briefed me on the calls that folks have made over this last weekend to ask folks to request absentee ballots for the spring election. We've reached out to more than 100,000 voters in the first 6 weeks of this year. And we've never had in a midterm election that kind of organizing energy, which happens when you invest year over year. It builds momentum. It becomes easier to build at a bigger scale. This is going to be a tough cycle. We all know it. We know that the pendulum swing in American politics makes midterm elections under Democratic presidents harder. But the level of commitment that all the hundreds of people on this Zoom and the hundreds and thousands of people in all of our states who are making it their job to save democracy, that makes me feel like this is so much more than worth it. This is the big fight, and we're right in the front lines of it, and that makes me get out of bed every morning.
Well, I am fired up about this cycle, especially knowing that it's being held down by Mike Schmuel in Indiana and you, Ben, in Wisconsin, and of course, Lavora in Michigan. So I want to thank everybody for having this discussion. This panel has been great. And I think Anthony put in the link in the chat a couple times, a link to support all of these wonderful Democratic parties. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude it and thank everybody for participating. Thanks all.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Everybody.